that each phase must play with, so you can check with peace. However, we do have this other path in order to, through this company, must be approved by the directory. It is defined if this is going to be processed directly. They verify with a public company and they subscribe a strategic alliance contract. Finally, that is executed. However, the other path is a pro-requirement process, quite similar to PPS. And the best offer is allocated, a contract is subscribed with here. In Ecuador, we have a national public contracting system. The idea is not to abate this system. Better yet, the company, CNL, gets allied with a private company, and cooperation begins with both companies to concrete some type of common objective with both parties being benefited. In the association models we have in the regulation current CLP, we have consortium, strategic alliances, and mixed economies. Here, this is the structuring of each one of them. These are the models. You can observe them in detail in this regulation, thinking about the classification of the projects, financing and origin, tariff, finance, co-finance, with origin, without public initiative, and with a non-required requisition, quite similar to the master plan, if it's there or not there. The bank publishes initiatives, CLP, for instance, in charge of generation and transmission in the country, and declares this as a public initiative. A path is followed, and when a proposal is required, meaning the private has found an opportunity in a project that complies with a specific objective, it is included and is carried out in a similar fashion, with a similar process. We have gotten to this point with multiple paths with which we try to enter this part to increase this private participation in the electric sector. Nowadays, it's mainly public. Here, we also have some related to, just to settle the idea of the pre-relationships. There is a regulation, a current regulation. You will find this also in the QR code. However, this must be modified because must include some other additional topics in population. One, meaning alliances and other things that are going to be included in this regulation. However, the generation transmission costs 1.1 private ones are in this relation and guarantee for the resources to arrive to the investors that have made the risk of investing in our sector. So far, that is the situation, the state of the institutional frameworks and mechanisms for the entering of generation. So to talk a little bit about the perspective on the country, here from year 2021, we see the progress until the end of 2024. So we have a composition of hydroelectricity, thermal, and different components on interconnection. We see how the percentages have changed, some decreases on energy. This is a historical energy chart that, whether due to earthquakes we've had in 2016, the pandemics, they cause that there's a decrease in the energy consumption of the countries. However, nowadays, we continue to increase in the energy. 2024, that was a very specific year. We had extreme drop in the country, in Ecuador, and made us rationalize this, rationing this. In this chart, we compare 2023, 2024, hydroelectricity decrease. The thermal one increased, renewable energy increased a little bit, and interconnection has been key. We will see the benefits with as an opportunity on transaction of energy. However, with adverse events in the country, it is key And it's usually key to mitigate some risks that you may have. So here we have an energy balance that we can observe in 2023, 2024. The generation we have in orange, renewable in green, imports in gray, and hydroelectricity in blue, light blue. And here demand, as we can observe, when demand surpasses the capacity of offer we have in the country, we go to issues in terms of rationing. It's just to clarify this, we have the offer and demand. So we can observe that during the periods where we have colors red in the lower part, in the bottom, we have rationing, and in the segmented area, the pointed area, our biggest dam, which is the Masar Dam. That, of course, has gotten to a point where everything was done, everything possible was done. However, in theory, it was the worst thing that could have happened. So in books, like theory, you could have kept or presented a completely dry scenario. So the levels of the dam did not achieve it. With all the capacity we had, the thermal park was unable to be solved. Nowadays, as we see, the generation offer surpasses demand, and we have a policy of maximum level on the dam to mitigate any adverse event that may happen. Here, this is the picture in the day 29. As I indicated, we have dependency extremely large on hydroelectricity. 83% of our matrix is formed by hydroelectricity, and so we can see the thermal 11%, renewable 2.56%, but this is data from September 29 this year. So we depend on hydroelectricity. So what we're looking for is to diversify the matrix and to be able to find those complements between available resources we have. So in the future, we are not so affected, we are not that impacted, severely impacted by climate events. This is the power growth on the national system, including the historical one. We are projecting towards the future. We can observe that the average growth in power ascends to 4.4%. That is what we have in vision for the future. The maximum demand of the country was for May, 5,110 megawatts, and the plan till 2034, 9,000, meaning in 10 years, is expected to duplicate the demand, to double the demand for electricity and power in the country. Energy, same thing. It's a little bit larger, the growth at 5% of energy in 10 years. Here we can see the variations and so on, some points on events, exogenous internal events that impact demand.
However, we are observed, we have a large requirement of power to still cover. Here, what we have here are singular things that are the projections of demand observed. There's potential that require infrastructure and generation to have productive issues. If, for example, a shrimp producer was driven towards power transition and now isolated in its fashion with great motors, but with liquid fuels, the mining sector then, and the oil single load sector. So until 2024, we had the incorporation of these types of loads of 1,125 megawatts, this is the expansion of generation plan, which I've copied. Due to type of generation, as we observe, we have a thermal component, which is full oil, diesel, and gas associated of how, and here we will see a detail about these fuels, and we have two large projects that we will see further down, which are Carnillo and Santiago, El Important Electrical projects for the country. That's where we see the increase in hydro from here forward and renewable non-conventionals. These blocks of 500s that are seen on the graph, and 2027 and more projection where we are at an excess of entry there. Here we can note of an aggregate and transition, and here we are quite stuck, and to increase our component of renewables, not eventually, in other words, photovoltaic, and at the same time to be firm, and in this case we are in processes through hydrocarbons looking at gas exploitation to give firmness to the system. We are looking into batteries and others additional. The idea is this, where in the upper half we have diesel consumption with a smaller proportion of the detailing of the country's generation, and as public knowledge, we are stimulating and driving a nuclear law in Ecuador. There's no solution at short term, but we are exploring it, and you could see it at a further horizon through modular reactors at small scale, which are available on market. Potential generations are available, where we can observe on the upper hand, at different generation types, thermal, wind, and bioenergy. We have 130 megawatts with investments of 606 million. And however, on the bottom we have the capacity still to explore with significant potential for 1,000 megas. In solar, it's 2,000. In bioenergy, which is biogas and biomass, 2,200 megawatts. Additionally, we have still a significant potential in hydroelectric power, where the Electrical Corporation had a study in 2022 updating hydroelectric potential, which reaches in the country around 1,880 megawatts, which are distributed across the board, with 6,000 megawatts and observable on the graph. So here there's a lot of power potential. So the challenge, as I understand, for many countries is to diversify and complement. So, in a summary, the opportunities we have as the power sector: first, we have high potential in diverse types of renewable energies. We have a great requirement for demand of the sectors that I've commented on: mining, shrimp production, oil production. There's challenges from the communities that are being displaced. We have generated or are generating incentives in private participation in the power industry with long-term and incentives for non-conventional renewable energy use, with even preference dispatching and subnationalities for construction and distribution. And I wish to mention, well, I don't have a slide properly for the subject, but however in the country we have exceptionality mechanisms where in distribution privates have worked quite well. We've incorporated or brought forth works in time that made it quite interesting. And this same path we are opening towards transmission through adequate regulation. So simply, it is a mechanism of which, as a state, we're planning a project for at least 2030 as an example, but there's very specific characteristics of private investments that are required to be done before it would be an agreement with the transmitter so that private can do the project with the private timeline and be paid through an agreement or any instrument that we are to define that may be of use so that the user can resupply his assets investment. And this infrastructure then would go into the hands of the transmitter, right? This is simple and in a summarized fashion. Here we also have participation schemes for private investment with generation, self-generation, self-supply, transmission and power storage. And in general public, we have a framework that's looking towards attracting these investments. So to be able to increase participation in private sectors and others. Regarding power integration, just a comment, before talking of integration, we have to strengthen of the transmission system, which interconnects to other countries. So here we have a picture of the current station at the left, and on the right, how we planned or foreseen a system which today, where we have a system of 500 per year on just one line necessary. The idea is to strengthen these 500 kV so that instead of further connecting inclusives, but also to incorporate generation into the system at voltage level and to be able to operate as other countries with more reliability and safety. Today, we have Colombian connection and of 230 volts, and the capacity here, well, is a bit more, 450, with differs from 230, and this is the first connections that we used to have, the largest, a bit more robust of the Intacade, and you will see the other Peruvian at 500 kV. So this is our schematic that brought challenges. We often thought that just connecting countries was easy, but we had inconveniences. We had to implement area separation schematics and subjects to be able to operate interconnectively. But the benefits are clear. Today, here we have in light blue what we've been able to import and in orange what we've exported. As we've said, the recent years, we've been, as a country, importing significant volume, and these are gigawatt volts, and we've also exported in adverse conditions, which other countries usually have inconveniences. So this has been of great benefit to be able to have this interconnection because it is oriented initially to take by placing margins on constituents due to lack of resources, then costs in the beginning instead of offering surplus at cheap prices to be bought better as beneficial, and this has been quite beneficial for all. For Ecuador. Here we have interconnection with Peru, quite geographical, with a quite simple monofilament graph, and we can observe that this is a large project with different interconnections, different from Colombia, where we connected to 230,000 volts. Here, the connection is to 500,000 volts, where we require a more robust interconnection system from both sides. So we have on the frontier and our border something, we have it with Peru at least. Here we see it quite simplified with Peru and Ecuador on one side during stage 1. And at the bottom here we can see a bit the idea, which may be in studies done jointly with different countries. We observe a complementary with country resources. In other words, if I resources, Peru doesn't, and vice versa. So this will be more beneficial. In Colombia, it has been already. However, in activities where in situations or phenomena affect Colombia, it affects Peru differently. So last year, I don't remember, I remember that it affected not only Ecuador, but also Colombia. So we have to maintain survivability of the countries through compliance of norms, and interconnection was concluded to assure supply facing adverse conditions, and there's a risk of loss of supply which may be presented if scenarios with Mexico were complicated on their behalf. That's it. This is the more relevant aspects of interconnection. Here, we can start with our investments catalog. And we are finishing. I apologize for delaying, but it is important to talk with you and show. I will just try to leave an impression. So regarding generation, we have today definite connections like the table with the two hydro stations commented, which are quite large. Santiago with 214. And a 200 mega wind power and combined cycle to give a bit more firmness to the system, which we are about to launch in October with 600 megawatts. Here, a picture of each to summarize the power behind the project, the yearly energy consumption, the construction rate, the plant factor, what's expected from headquarters, and these are issues which we are updating with unit pricing. And in this case, this project has an integral focus where we have to focus on that dam that I've showed you before. So Cardenillo is at the end of this hydroelectric change, adding into the power scene here. So it's part of this large complex of hydroelectric power that we can have available in the country. Here we have a large variety today of plant factor in the south part of our country, where there's a lot of wind. Here we have estimated it in the south of the country at least. Here we have some projects which are with initials. If it's true, this or two which aren't extensive, or they seem more like small packages, public selection processes, mechanisms that can also be executed to debate your projects. And likewise, we have initial studies challenges, and here there may be other type of mechanisms involved. You can here talk exclusively with these initial studies that have not advanced much, and we have great potential. Here we have these are, if I'm not mistaken, these are photovoltaic. Or the idea here would be to continue to advance in non-conventional renewables. We have geothermals, a subject that even though we have comparison with Cochimiro and we are advancing there, we have mechanisms where we can make it more attractive for these types of we're having technical difficulty is the border that we have, which is responsibility of the transmitters. So we have different equipment thought of to respond quicker, because maybe building certain bays with certain equipment and substations of the transmitter would take significant time. The idea is to have equipment available for quick response, and all of the repowering of the transmission systems and sites. Around 12 different projects considered with around $200 million. 12 different projects considered with around $200 million in them. Regarding distribution, sub-voltages, and we have a company that manages in Ecuador with distribution systems nationally and the distribution system, which brings together networks and different type of projects, which are observable in the following QR. You can download all of the project types that I've mentioned today. And that would be it from my behalf. We are open for questions and we thank you for your participation. Give it a minute because the presentation is a bit heavy. 200 mega. Please give it a minute. You might think it's a mistake. No, we've made it with lots of love. So, thanks.
Thank you so much, Vice Minister, for the clear explanation. Please, we need to open up the dialogue, and we invite the participant companies to please help us with your questions and comments, topic of interest that you may have on this presentation. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation from the Development Agency of France. Yes, I have a question. We see the association of multiple large. I imagine that there's private investment and public investment. I'm interested about that division from your side. I don't know if you have percentages or an idea on how much you wish to invest as a state, directly or with public companies, and what should be, in theory, the support from the private sector. As you say, the needs are many. What we've said on the path would be that public generation provides strength achieved with fossil fuels. It's not okay for me to say this, but it is. And the private side should do non-conventional energies. It is the path that is actually being financed by the banks. A bank doesn't finance thermal machinery. So there's a plan. And with public companies, we are doing generation, firm generation, and everything that is non-conventional renewables would be that way. Thank you. My name is Adrián Peña, teacher for many years. I've gone through some phases on the electrification of the country, and I would like to make a comment and a question. Ricardo, since the year 78, if not before, in the Constitution of Republic doesn't allow for this public-private type of investment. That is why some governments decided to use these public entities. But public entities continue to be under the umbrella of the controllership. They're both. I was also part of the board of the public company Poltec. While you have both, it's really hard. It is struggling because many easy things are found not to go through that path. On the other side, if large works in large government programs, yes, the military, then the period we had before, because those are investments that require minimum 6 years or even more, and the governments don't have a term longer than 4. So we have this political balance. It opens up, it closes, so projects, some are not. So another problem within the country, we have fuel with subsidies. Say this because of the university. So in order to research is being generated, and that is my point of view. Maybe there are many comments that are well accepted, but yes, it's my comment. Thank you, Vice Minister. Thank you for the we're clear that the Constitution does stop the issue of private investment. It is of public knowledge, and the country is constituent meeting of topics to be talked about are this exceptionality that can delegate to private. That is the first lock pad, because exceptional is in the case that I can't, because as you say, it becomes in a timely fashion. I agree with you. Thank so far, there's no controllership yet. It's struggling. There's a lot of fear. So what we're doing nowadays to support companies, the technicians of our backup, in order to decisions. They are the ones that publish processes, reference terms. Are if they are afraid, that won't move forward. It's gonna take them more time, more than a public government, not electrical. So the idea is to take over something a bit more robust for the electrical system dedicated to us, and a different type of funds that will allow the issue of timely expansion of the system. But that is something we're working on. Thank you. Yes. Hi everyone, Sergio Martinez, responsible from the private sector of the Investment Bank, Development Bank from the European Union. I wanted to congratulate you, Vice Minister, for the excellent presentation you've done. All data was, and I was wondering, my colleague, all the data you've conveyed were quite loyal, quite trustworthy. The best way of solving a problem is being conscious and working for that. We've seen what has happened in Ecuador, and we're working aligned with IDB, Juan Paredes, the whole team with Ecuador in order to solve the issues in the system. And what we wish to convey, I don't know if we have a private company, but in general, that is the will of the European Investment Bank to support Ecuador in the public sector, but also the private sector. We wish to be part of that energy transition. In that reform that was performed by other 97, 98, we've seen it with the case in different countries. In the region will be doesn't have much sense in Ecuador, but maybe the best energy is the one that is not being consumed. In Ecuador, unfortunately, due to the internal and external subsidy, people don't have awareness on the value of energy. We see that the equipments are not efficient, isolation of buildings does not work properly, they have air conditionings and open windows because they don't add value, they don't know it. Since it's a resource that is not expensive, should not be expensive, should be affordable for all because it's a leverage for development. But likewise, perhaps at some point we should look for that sustainability. Also seems quite interesting the warranties that are being generated by the IDB. We believe will be capable of having project finance type of financing. We would have loved to participate. Last year was difficult for us, but probably if the warranty is successful, we can all go to a second phase. And so thank you to the European Union delegation for your work, and to finish by displaying our support, the support of the European Union, and our availability to continue to support to everybody that goes to Ecuador and feels we're home. Thank you so much. I share that yes, we are with this new model, observing everything that has happened with the help and support from IDB. There are consultant companies that are supporting us about regarding the topic. But yes, of course, nowadays, as you can see, there's a high composition of public companies. So we need to see what fits better to the situation we have currently in the country. And likewise, something that provides the warranties to the private entities to continue to invest with us. We are clear that we need to go to that path, and with the help of IDB and Google that is helping us, we will be able to travel that path. And yes, I think that's something I can say. Thank you.
Señor viceministro,
Mr.
buenas
Vice
tardes.
Minister, good afternoon.
En la presentación observamos
In the
que
presentation, we see that
se pronosticaba una oferta
an offer
que
was
estaba superior a
forecasted,
la demanda.
higher than
También
demand.
existen 532
Supply higher than
megas que
demand.
van a
Also
entrar,
532 megas that will
732 que
enter,
van a entrar.
732
¿Cuáles
that
son
will
las
enter.
oportunidades para otros
Those are
nuevos
opportunities
proyectos?
for other
¿Y
new
cuán
projects?
interesante es para el Ecuador
How interesting
el dar
is this for
apoyo al
Ecuador to
desarrollo de una
support
industria
the
local
development of a
de
local
renovables?
industry on
Tenemos
renewable
dos
ones?
puntos.
2
Tenemos
points.
una sobreoferta que se han implementado con
Have been implemented with technology, local technology.
Sí, está claro, ¿no?
Yeah, it's
A
clear.
ver, con la gráfica que observaron, era
With
una
the chart
gráfica de
you've
capacidad
observed,
instalada. Entonces, en esa gráfica parece sobre oferta. Sin
that
embargo, hay
seems to
energías
be
como las energías
oversupply.
renovables no convencionales,
But that is
específicamente
non-conventional renewable
eólica
energies, wind
y fotovoltaica,
and
que no
photovoltaic,
aportan en la
that do not
potencia, ¿no?
support
en la noche,
power
a pesar de que
at
obviamente
nighttime.
hoy por hoy hay tecnología de almacenamiento.
Well, there are
Sin
some
embargo,
storage
inclusive nuestra regulación de
technologies.
10 a 100
Even our
megawatts
regulation from 10 to
incluye
100
o
megawatts
solicita
already
un
includes or
almacenamiento de menos del
requires storage
10%
of at least
4 horas.
10%,
¿Por
4
qué no
hours.
más? Porque
Why
claro,
not more?
obviamente hoy
Because,
por
of
hoy
course,
pedir 100%
nowadays, having
en baterías
100% of
y
backup
mucho tiempo
with
es muy
batteries for a
costoso.
long time is quite expensive.
Entonces ya cuando usted coge
So
y
when
estas
you
variables que le digo y
collect
las mete ahí,
this
va
that I
descontando
say
algunos
and put it
megawatts.
there, you discount a couple of
Porque no
megawatts
tanto en potencia como en
because
energía.
power is
Entonces,
energy.
ese ejercicio también lo hemos hecho
So yes, we've done that exercise, and
estamos con
to
tenemos un acuerdo
to
ministerial
take
con el
note of
equipo de
that,
planificación.
we are working with a
Los
planning
los
group
mejores
in the
expertos en el sector
ministry.
eléctrico están
The best
sentados
one in the
en
electric
Ecuador, en un
in the
espacio
electric
físico,
area. They're sitting in
revisando
a
todas estas
conclave type of
variables.
fashion,
Este
reviewing
espacio
all of these
donde
variables,
quiere vea
locked,
todo este tema.
trying to review this topic.
Respondiendo a su pregunta, va a haber
And
necesidades
to
en el
answer
privado.
this question, there
Eso
will
está
be
claro.
needs on the private
La
sector.
oportunidad hay.
That's clear. There's an
Inclusive
opportunity.
este grupo
Even we
ya
have
tuvo
a
trabajo
committee, a work group
más allá del tema de determinar qué
that goes
proyectos van a
beyond
entrar.
finishing
La idea es un
on
poco
thinking
por
about the
dónde van a
projects that
entrar
will get in
y
where,
determinar esta
and to
capacidad de
finish that
conexión que tanto quizás nos está
connection
faltando un
capacity
poco hacia
that is
ustedes, ¿no? Es
missing
decir, un mapa en el
with
cual
you.
digamos que aquí
A
hay tantos
map
megavatios por conectar,
that says
sino
this
que
amount of
estamos
megawatts to
ciegos,
connect,
¿no? Vamos
but
a ir
you're
con las cosas
blind.
parece, entonces
Let's see, I
piensen
stop.
en un va y ven con, ya sea con el
It's a
controlador
balance
o con el transmisor
with the
y
distributor or
eso
the
es lo que está mal.
transmitter.
Hoy por hoy
And
la
that is
idea
not
es
okay.
tener
Nowadays, the idea is
disposición
having
de
availability
tecnologías
with all
dispositivos
technological
y
tools
disponibilizar
available,
estos datos para que
make
ustedes puedan
available this
saber
data
cuánta
for you to
capacidad
know
tenemos en
the
punto en
real
punto y puedan ustedes
capacity at the different
no ustedes
spots.
acercarse a decir, bueno, ¿y
So
puedo
you don't need to
conectar
go
cuánto?
there and ask, how much can I connect? Can I connect?
De manera más
So you
ágil
can
los
formulate in an
proyectos.
agile way all projects.
Bien, Rubén Meléndez de Perú.
Rubén
Quería
Milen from Peru.
tocar dos puntos,
I wanted to touch upon two
dos
topics,
comentarios en todo caso.
two
El
comments
primero con
actually.
respecto
The first one
a
regarding
las auditorías, el
auditings
proceso que
and the
retrasa
process
la
that
toma de decisiones.
delays the decision-making process.
Quería saber primero si es
I
que
wanted
algo
to know
se
first,
que
is
han
there
hecho
anything
para
that you have considered
tratar de resolver ese
to
tema,
try and solve
cuál
this
podría
topic?
ser una alternativa, una auditoría
Perhaps an
concurrente
auditing, a concurrent
que
auditing might be an
no
alternative
eliminar, pero
that
hacer
might
menos
minimize, not eliminate,
costosa.
but
Esa
minimize
es la
the
primera.
terms. That's the
Y la
first one.
segunda
The
es con
second one
respecto a
regarding,
absolutamente de acuerdo con la
I completely
diversificación
agree
que
with
se necesita
diversification
en Ecuador y en
required
todos los
in
países, ¿no?
Ecuador and all
Pero
countries. But
creo que no vi en
I
la
believe that
presentación
I
ningún
didn't
tema
saw
asociado
in the presentation any
al
topic associated
mantenimiento
to maintenance
del sistema
of the
energético dinámico.
system, hydro energy
Las
system.
las empresas,
The
o en todo caso
companies,
el capital, o sea, las centrales hidroeléctricas deben tener un
the
tiempo de vida.
hydroelectrical
Y ese
centrals have a
tiempo de
life
vida
cycle.
depende
That
en
life
base
cycle,
a cuál es el promedio
well,
europeo,
I don't really know the
seguramente están
average, but
llegando a su
probably
tiempo de vida útil.
is getting to
Y
the life
entonces,
cycle
si bien es
end.
cierto, hay que realizar
Even though
una
it's true, yes,
absoluta diversificación,
diversification
no
must
creo
be
que dejar de
performed,
lado
absolutely,
el
but we must
mantenimiento
not
y la
leave aside
asistencia. En todo
maintenance
caso,
and repowering of hydroelectrical centrals, because we may have a problem depending on the renewables if we don't have a hydraulic central available. To answer your first question, in certain type of contracting processes has been required connection of controllership, which is the entity for control of processes, administrative topics, during pre-contract phase, meaning structuring until the launching, and say, I will join you and help you out. And from there on, when it's executed, that's it. So far, so good. However, according to the amount of processes, it turns impossible, humanly impossible for them to be involved in all. Maybe in some, but not all. But if we're trying to make them participate, yes, we are. Now, the second part, I don't know if all or some countries, but we think that assets are infinite. Distribution especially. You need to be there, stop until it falls. And when it falls, you change it. And that happens throughout the chain. We are aware that life cycle of the main hydro centrals is quite near the end. We know it, but there are projects to repower them, and they provide the second cycle to the assets. There's a project for the Molino. So we need to think about this reposition mapping on the assets throughout time. I asked in Colombia, I had a visit last year, and I was asking what happens with the thermal central there. Do you remove it at some point? And they say, no, we'll stay there for life. Stay there because physically there's an issue to assemble more generation plants. We have urban growth. There's no place to assemble it. It becomes tricky. So it has a concession mechanism, a private mechanism, and the private needs to check what to do because it's a business. They live from on that, and they need to see if they need to change the machinery little by little to repower it. So all of those things, yeah, in the public environment seem to be a bit more complicated. In the private environment, per megawatts you need to sell is money that doesn't come in, goes in. But in the public side, we have this type of well, if it doesn't work, I'm going to get a fine because of lack of availability, but it doesn't really matter. We're trying to think about what are the mechanisms to promote, what is the plan we can carry out in order to mitigate that problem, which we have detected, we have observed this. But I don't know if this is something we can solve on the short term, but we do need a plan as part of this expansion plan, right? Which is not just what you said. We know about the new things, but we shouldn't lose sight of what we have.
Hello, Vice Minister. Thank you for your presentation. I must admit it was extremely well documented. Thank you for that. I'm Fred Conrads. I'm the CEO of Belga Solar. Belga Solar is a solar installation company based in Belgium, and we are also a manufacturer of solar panels. Last year, and we are considering investing in the country because we have seen a lot of interest, for solar installation, but also we have ideas to do special products for Ecuador, in Ecuador. I noticed in your presentation, that's for who I am and my company, but I noticed in your presentation, and it's actually a very good thing, that you are planning to go into hydraulic, of course, renewables, and among those technologies, I believe, and that's what I have observed, is that solar is the more mature technology. And considering the need and the gap we have in Ecuador, and I was there during the blackouts, I was wondering if there are other ways or additional ways to speed time to market with solar, among all these other things that will take time. You see the time that it takes for nuclear and all these things. And during my journey and my meetings in Ecuador, I've had a lot of discussions on big solar farms, up to 10 megawatt, 100 megawatts, and these kind of things. But I was also wondering if, and that's maybe not a question for you, but for the government more broadly, if you're also considering faster ways to get to market with the SMEs, with the households. And that's a little bit the experience we have in Europe, is to adopt and to stimulate the adoption of those technologies. A lot of governments in Belgium, in France, in Germany, they went through a period of tax incentive or other incentives to facilitate adoption in a number of segments. It was in some countries, corporate tax rebates, other countries, VAT reduction when households or SMEs were actually investing into solar. So that's maybe not a question for you, for the Minister of Finance, but I was wondering what is the perspective of Ecuador on the topic?
Bueno, voy a responder en español. A ver, estamos...
And the problem today, though, further than we want to massively enter into solar power, is we can observe there is a lack of definite design or study. There's a lot of potential, but lack of studies. So we have opened a regulation where we have reached 100. We could see that initiatives, and thus that's why the limit, just to massify. We know that photovoltaic is quick entry. We are aware. So this regulation has been specific for this. So to have this entry, the quickest as possible, to mitigate this difference that we have, where we can observe during the period of low electricity that we had last year, for example. Regarding taxes, if I'm not mistaken, I think there's a liberation or differentiations for imported panels. I'll owe you that answer. But there have been during reasoning, in fact, one of the regulations of 0 to 10 megawatts, the reasoning period, we were cutting salts with the idea of mitigating, and that's where we have around 500 megawatts, which are in process. And also answering to the question that I still owed regarding local production, we could get together. I would love to analyze possibilities. Today, panels are all imported, and as indicated by the Solar Vega company partner, there has been incorporation in the self-generation of homes unexpectedly because due to the price of panels. However, we have to analyze as a country if we can reduce even more the taxes of all elements, not only the panels, of the inverters and other additional details to have them for quick entry, but also maybe a factory here would help greatly. So we are open to listen and see if we could go through that path where we could cheapen the entry of this generation type. Okay, very quickly. Thank you very much. I am from for Industrial Development, and thank you very much for such a detailed presentation. My question is, we haven't seen in the presentation is the work and the interest that is being given to the demand, to the decarbonization, specifically to large consumers. And I also make the moment to highlight the interest of my organization of supporting Ecuador in this sense in processes of decarbonization, and also to mention online the planning at the level of transmission and interconnection that exists. We are looking to promoting, starting from economic corridors, power corridors, where these instances are made of use mega infrastructures, and we begin to articulate the power concept among these actions. So it brings us towards electrification of demand, power efficiency in the industry, interconnection, long-term planning, sustainability for carbon footprint are more holistic concepts that we would like to also talk with Ecuador, where we can also support them, and the union of efforts, for example, from the Bank of Development and the multilateral banks. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrea. Two questions there were. First is that we've tried to give the signal. As you know, in Ecuador, the sales price, the average sales price for final user for now is at around 10 cents. In recent years, what we've tried to do is to those who consume to high voltage consumption, we call them B1 and AB2 clients, whom are connected to 138,000 and above networks, and also 13.8, so 13,000 volts upwards to increase the tariff somewhat, so it justifies and they motivate themselves to invest in self-generation, because since the tariff exists as it existed, they wouldn't do so because it's a tariff that's not real. Thus, you can say, well, if you make a financial corridor, well, I'm up for that. So the idea is to do this at par so that you use the subject or more efficient consumption. And for self-generation, we've stimulated even through Decree 32, we ask clients of high voltage, and that's not the spirit of it, right? If not, we would be giving a good signal. It's a more complex issue because it's quite transversal to all that we've talked about in these days. So it's not a concrete answer. We have to sit down and see what we have today and what would be the next steps that we can give, short, mid, and talk of a plan to see what we can do today as signal and forward. To maybe give some steps, we agree. There are steps to be given, but with what's happened, we have to continue acting. And we have reunited to see what is the way. We thank you, Mr. Vice Minister, for the transparency of the information, for generating such an open dialogue with great interests. We also, as Inter-American Bank of Development, as multilaterals and financiers, well, we need to coordinate to generate these spaces to diversify the electrical grid in Ecuador and support the government. So, and all of these efforts. Thank you very much. We wish to ask for your registry. If you haven't registered, please, before leaving, to set up a database, and we hope to generate new spaces with delegates from the European Union through the web gateway strategy. And we also wanted to ask if you could allow us 2 additional minutes to tell you what the strategy is about and how to incentivize private sector. Thank you very much for the question. The strategy is, well, the focus, as I've said, is on facilitating investments. In the past, we did many things. Now we work on regulation, on many soft items, and now the focus is on facilitation of investments. So how do we do this? First, with technical support, because we have to prepare projects. Thus, we have facilities of technical support, and colleagues are here to, if they want more information. But we also have financial instruments. We have guarantees with the European Fund of Durable Development. We have the possibility of giving subventions to facilitate projects. And as I've said before, we want to facilitate the presence of European countries with local companies and international other actors. So as I said, what the minister has presented show that there are many possibilities for Ecuador, and I am open to investment, so we hope that this offers possibility for European countries, and we are ready to support the government in these efforts to increase investments in the electrical sector, generation, transmission, distribution, power efficiency, and all sectors that are priority for the energy transition of the country. So it seems to me that Redigenta is very aligned with government's priorities. In this way, we can support with all of the measures that we have on hand. Thank you very much, Stefano. This initiative is very important. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. Good afternoon.